Hello and welcome to Oxy's Spring 2019 Fulbright Student Awards info session. My name is Jennifer Locke. I'm the Director of Fellowships at Oxy, and today I'm going to be talking about the Fulbright Awards in general, as well as specific information you'll need to know if you're planning on applying through Oxy. So if you are going to be a senior in fall 2019, or if you're an alum who is thinking about coming back and applying through Oxy's process, I'll go over the timeline as well as the components that you'll need to apply through us. Okay, so first a little bit of background about the Fulbright program. The Fulbright program was created in 1946 by Congress, and it was specifically meant to increase mutual understanding between people of the U.S. and people of other countries. It's administered by the Institute for International Education, and it's overseen by both the U.S. and by commissions and embassies overseas. So the important thing to take away from this slide really is the mission of the Fulbright program and the fact that that involves mutual understanding between cultures. No matter whether you're applying for a study grant, a research grant, or a teaching assistantship, you'll need to incorporate this mission into your application at some point. So maybe your work sort of naturally helps to create mutual understanding between cultures, or maybe what you talk about is how you're going to be stepping out of the classroom or the lab to really get to know people in the community and create mutual understanding that way. But just make sure that you understand this is really at the heart of the Fulbright program, so it needs to be part of your application. Okay, so I'm going to go over some of the basic eligibility and selection criteria here. Really the two things you need to know in terms of eligibility are the fact that you have to be a U.S. citizen because this is a State Department run program, and the fact that you have to be, in order to do a Fulbright, you have to be between a bachelor's degree and a PhD. Actually, after you're a PhD, you can apply to be a Fulbright scholar, so there's a separate Fulbright program for PhDs. But if you are a senior who wants to apply through Oxy, or if you're an alum who hasn't started grad school yet, you're welcome to come back through Oxy's process. Once you go to grad school, you're still eligible to apply, but you should apply through your university instead at that point. So that's sort of that education range and the citizenship are really the most important eligibility points. In addition to that, they prefer to give Fulbrights to people who have not spent an extensive time in the country as adults. So if you have been already working in the country for a couple of years, you're probably ineligible to apply. Similarly, some countries do not allow dual citizens to apply, so you want to check with the country requirements really carefully as you're thinking about which country to apply to. That being said, if you were a child in that country and have not been back for an extensive period of time since then, you are eligible to apply and you can be very competitive. If you have studied abroad in that country, you're welcome to apply to return to that country. So that won't disqualify you. You might be required to have some language ability depending on what country you're applying to. So again, this is something to check the country page about. But what you really need to know is that you need whatever language is necessary to complete your project. So if you're going to be doing interviews in a different language, or if you're going to be doing some sort of archival research that involves a lot of reading, you'll certainly need a higher level of language than someone whose project is, working in a chemistry lab and doesn't really involve a lot of language, for example. So you really need to have the language that's required by the country and also language that's required by your project. You also need to have, no matter what kind of work you're proposing to do, sufficient preparation for that work. So you need to be able to prove that you have the experience necessary, the skills necessary to do the work you're proposing to do. You also, as I mentioned before, need to have an interest in cultural exchange. And Fulbright is looking as well at what they call ambassadorial qualities, which are things like leadership, communication skills, resourcefulness, maturity, anything that's going to assure them that you can succeed in this grant and that you will do well in another country. So there are really two major types of Fulbright grants. So the first group is the research study grants. These are currently being offered in over 140 countries. There's over 950 of these awards right now. And these are either independent research grants, so something like a version of your senior comps, for example, but that would take place over a whole, say, 9 to 12-month period in a different country, that where you would propose your research questions, your research method, and complete an entire research project. Or it could be a study grant, which is basically money for graduate study in another country. Or it could be an arts project, and that could be anything from studying an instrument under a master teacher to proposing to create a number of sculpture pieces or something like that in a particular location for a particular purpose. So all of these kinds of independent or academic-minded grants kind of fall into this category of research or study grants. The other major category is English teaching assistantships. They're offering even more of these awards this year, about over 1,200 of them in about 75 countries. And these are slightly different because you apply to the country's teaching program and they assign you to a school where you assist in teaching English. In most of these schools, you're going to be helping a teacher. So you might be the conversation leader or the person who is helping with the English class as opposed to someone who's running their own classroom. But there are some exceptions. I've definitely heard from Fulbright alumni who were thrown into a classroom space where they were asked to create their own syllabi and to lead the class. Usually the country is pretty good at describing what the assignment is going to look like, and they'll tell you if you'll be expected to lead a class or not. So, but that's something to be aware of, that these teaching assistantships can really vary, both in terms of the nature of the assignment, whether you're leading or assisting, and in terms of the age groups you're working with, how much time you're expected to spend at the school, that sort of thing. All right, so I just wanted to really quickly show you the Oxy Fulbright Award winners who found out. These are the people who found out in spring 2018 that they had won. So these are people who are during the year of 2018 to 2019 currently abroad and working on their Fulbrights. So as you can see, we have people who've won both research and ETA grants, and we have people who are in countries in different continents all over the world. All right, so what I'm going to be breaking down next are the basic steps for applying. So first, choosing what type of grant you're applying to. This is important because you can only apply to one kind of Fulbright grant and one country per year, per application cycle. So you have to decide on your one Fulbright you're applying to that year. Then you'll be asking for recommendations, writing your application, getting feedback on it and revising, and then finally interviewing and finalizing your application. So the first thing to do is just decide what kind of grant you're looking for. So are you going to be applying for a research Fulbright, a study Fulbright, or an English teaching assistantship? So here's some things to consider if you're going back and forth between these types of grants. So for research, you're really looking for someone who can demonstrate the relevant experience and skills and language skills that are needed to carry out this project. So if you're thinking about a research grant, think about the research you've already done, maybe in your classes, in internships, or in summer programs. How have you already been completing some kind of research, and how can you sort of extend that work into a Fulbright project? You also need compelling reasons to conduct research in another country. So sometimes that's really obvious. So maybe you're a geology student who wants to study a specific kind of mountain range or a specific volcano that's located in a very specific area. That is a reason to be in that country, right? Or sometimes you have sociological field research that requires a close proximity to a particular kind of population that you're going to be interviewing. Then you need to be on the ground. But other times this argument might seem harder. So say you're a physics student and you want to join a particular lab, but there are labs that do that kind of work in the US as well, and you don't necessarily need to be in that location. How do you make that argument? Well, try to figure out what makes the research distinctive there. I think if there's anything else about that university environment or local community that's going to inform the work that you're doing, and just try to make an argument for why being in that location is very important for your next step. All right, so if you're thinking about a study grant, first of all, there are fewer study grants than there are other kinds of grants. So you have to make sure that the country you're interested in offers grants for graduate study, basically. But if you have identified some grants and you're thinking about that, you want to make sure you meet the entrance requirements for that program, just like you would for any grad school application. And then again, you have compelling reasons to complete that graduate program in that country. So I was talking with Laura Siri, who's one of the Fulbright program administrators, about study grants, and she said what she would recommend is that you have a central study question in mind, and that you argue in your statement of purpose essay why you need to answer that question in that location. So what is it about being in that space, being at that particular program, that particular university, that will allow you to investigate that question in a way you couldn't in the US? That's a hard question, but I think if you can answer it, you have a very compelling case for a Fulbright grant. And then if you're thinking about the ETA, you need to have a real desire to teach. You can't just say that you want to do something different for a year, or that you want to, take a break from your normal work or something. You have to have maybe not a career investment in teaching, but at least a real desire to teach for this Fulbright year, and be able to articulate why that makes sense for you. They're also really looking for those characteristics of maturity and flexibility, because they want people who are going to work well with the local students and with the local teachers. Some countries require that you have language skills already, or that you have teaching experience already. Others don't. So you want to make sure that you meet any of those kinds of requirements. And again, you want to be able to talk about your reasons for teaching in that country in particular. So they don't want to see an application where you can remove the country's name and replace it with a different country, and the application would still make sense. Like, they want to see something that's tailored to that country for whatever reason. So it could be your personal interest in that country, your personal connection to it. Maybe you just are interested in the culture for some reason, or it connects to your field of study or your work. So really think about that as you're putting together an application. I often get asked, what country should I choose? I'm interested in traveling almost anywhere, or anywhere on this continent, but how do I narrow down which country? So I have a few pieces of advice. The first is to, just do a lot of reflection and figure out where would you most like to travel and why. Because the more interest you genuinely have in that country, the stronger your application is going to be. Second, you want to study the country page to make sure you're a good fit. So again, say you know Spanish, and so you're thinking about Latin America. You're also thinking about Spain, and you're thinking about teaching English. Well, the English teaching programs look really different in different Spanish-speaking countries. You'll work with different age groups in different countries. Some have higher bars, higher requirements for previous experience with teaching. So you really want to sort of look at all of those different countries, place them side by side, and think, okay, which one is the best fit for my experience level and my interests? And then finally, if you really can't decide between a couple of countries, then I would look at the statistics that are available on Fulbright's homepage to compare the competition histories in those countries. You can see for the last few cycles how many people applied, how many people received the grants, and if one of the countries has historically been a lot more competitive than another one, you might want to go with a slightly less competitive one. And that might be something that could be a tiebreaker in your decision. Know that you should always take those statistics with a grain of salt. They could always change. The situation could be different this year. But they do give you some insight into which countries have historically been the most competitive and which ones could really use some more applicants. All right, so no matter what kind of grant you decide to apply to, early on, you want to be talking to your recommenders. You want to make sure that you identify and talk with 3 people who can write for you. All of the different kinds of grants require 3 recommendations, although as I say at the bottom of the slide, there are different kinds of recommendations depending on the type of grant. So if you're applying for a research grant or a study grant, you're going to be asking for letters of recommendation, much like you would for graduate school. So you'll probably be mostly asking professors in that case and asking people to attest to your academic abilities, your research skills, and having them, complete a letter about that and uploading it to the Fulbright site. If you're applying for the ETA program, however, then you'll need an application form, so it's a little bit different. So in that case, your recommenders won't write a letter for you, but they will answer specific questions about your communication abilities, your maturity, how much you're committed to this teaching year, that sort of thing. You can actually look at these questions ahead of time before you select your recommenders, so I recommend you do that, read the questions, think, who can answer these questions for me? No matter what, make sure you're asking professionals, so don't ask any friends, peers, but people who have known you in some kind of teaching or supervisory capacity, like people who've supervised you at a job, people who have seen your research or taught you, that sort of thing. No matter what you're applying for, ask at least one OXI faculty member, because that's really your full-time job, especially if you're a senior, right? And again, I would focus on mostly faculty members or research supervisors if you're applying for a research or study grant. But if you're going to be going for an ETA, you might consider someone who's seen you teach or who has seen you go abroad or something like that and can attest to those characteristics that they ask about in the application. All right, so in order to start an application, you're going to be going to this Fulbright U.S. Student Program website. And then you go under applicants, and as you can see on the slide, you scroll down to Embark Online Application, and that will start your application. This application usually opens around March, so you could, as early as the spring semester, be starting your application and just working on it in tiny bits and saving it. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I would encourage you to start it as early as possible, just so you can see what's coming up and know all the components really well. There's no reason not to register early. I show this slide in part because it seems like every year I've worked as a Fulbright advisor, I've had 1 or 2 people who have entered through the wrong portal, either gone through the Fulbright Scholar program, which is for professors and PhDs, or who have gone through a portal as if they were a student from a different country trying to apply to the U.S. So they thought that they were applying for the Spain ETA program, but they were accidentally applying through Spain to come to the U.S. for a teaching program. So in order to avoid those problems, I want to make sure you see what the web page looks like. This is the correct page, the U.S. student program, and you always want to go to the Embark online application. All right, so once you register for that application, you'll see that the major components include abstracts of your project and your plans, information about your personal life, your educational history, your work volunteer history, the kind of things you would put on a resume, and then transcripts. And in addition, you have 2 essays that you have to write, and these are really the most important parts of your application, I would argue. I've had the chance to observe national selection committees, and these 2 or 3 pages of, total of writing are what they spend most of the time talking about. So really this is what has to be perfect and as strong as possible when you submit your application. Everybody writes a 1-page personal statement, which basically connects Fulbright to your personal and professional trajectory. So this is where you talk about your past, what you have been doing, especially at OXI, to prepare for this grant, your future, what you want to do beyond Fulbright, what you see your long-term plans being, and how Fulbright connects your past and your future. So that's really what you need to argue about in that personal statement. In the statement of grant purpose, your purpose will vary slightly depending on what kind of grant you're applying for. So you have 2 pages if you're applying for a research or study grant, and 1 page if you're applying for an ETA. But no matter what you're doing, you need to sort of provide a plan for your Fulbright year. So if you are a research applicant, this is really your research proposal. You talk about what you're going to research, with whom, using what methods, answering what questions. If you're applying for a grad program, a study program, you'll talk about your plan of study, your ideas of courses and research, and again, how you're going to be how your study is going to be impacted by being in that space, right? So how is being in that country, in that particular location, going to help you answer your study question? If you're an ETA applicant, this is where you can really talk about your plans for the classroom, for starting cross-cultural conversations. If your country requires you to do some sort of service project or other kind of side project, talk about what that side project looks like. It's basically how are you planning to go about the year and to bring good ideas to the classroom. And all statements of purpose, going back to that Fulbright mission slide, need to include information about community engagement. How are you going to get out there beyond your work and meet people? Like, what are you going to do for fun that lets you really connect deeply with the culture in which you will be living? So other requirements will vary based on the kind of grant you're applying to in the country. If you're applying for a research grant in particular, you need a letter of affiliation. This is the letter that you get from someone in the host country who has agreed to supervise your work and writes a letter for you saying they would be happy to host your research if you were awarded a Fulbright. This is most often a faculty member at a university abroad, but it could be, depending on the country and their rules for affiliations, it could potentially be sort of an NGO director or someone at an archival library who would be supervising your research, or someone at maybe a lab director at a research institute. It really depends on your particular situation, and I'm happy to answer questions about that. If you're going to a country where a certain level of language is required, then you are required to get your language evaluated by an OXI professor. So there's a foreign language evaluation form that you can request, and you can basically have it sent to a language professor that you speak with who has agreed to evaluate your language skills. And they're going to be doing a quick evaluation if you're reading, you're writing, listening, and speaking in that language. You'll also be required to do a self-evaluation where you also evaluate your own skills and provide a little bit more information about how you plan to improve those skills between the time of application and the start of the grant period. There are also some special requirements by country. For example, Japan requires you to not only give your usual statement of grant purpose in English, but also write a version of it in Japanese. So that's something that's very particular to Japan. You wouldn't know it unless you read the country page. So make sure you read that. Go to the Fulbright U.S. student program page, go to the countries tab, and spend some time reading that country page very carefully to see if there's any kind of special requirements like that. So when the reviewers are evaluating your work, they're going to be really looking at 3 key things. One is the actual work you're proposing to do, the quality of it. Is that work feasible? Is that work compelling? Does it make sense for that country? Does it make sense for your trajectory? 2, are you prepared to do this work? Are you making a good case for your qualifications and for the background experience that you're bringing to the table? And 3, do you and your sort of motivations seem to align with Fulbright's mission? So are you bringing to the table, sort of through the way you talk about your grant and your approach to the year, this clear sense that you're committed to cultural exchange? Are you bringing sort of the maturity and flexibility and other kinds of qualities that they're looking for? Some of that they're going to get from your essays. Some of that they'll get from your recommendations. So this is what they're looking for. They're looking for the project, they're looking for preparation, and they're looking for the person, really, and the fit with the mission. Okay, so I told you I would talk about our own process. So the application, I'm not sure exactly when it's going to open. It could be as early as March or it might be in April, but it's usually in the spring that application opens, so you just want to keep an eye out for that. We're going to have a preliminary application due at the end of June, June 28th. This, you can find the form on our fellowships office webpage, but this is basically an intent to apply form saying, I think I'm going to be applying for Fulbright. I'm interested right now in this country or group of countries. I'm interested in this kind of grant. And here's some information about what I'm thinking. Most of what this does is just lets me know you're thinking of applying and helps to launch summer advising. So I can be working with you over the summer in order to have a really strong application for the fall. The next deadline is the internal application, which is going to be September 16th this year. That's when you basically need to have a complete draft of your entire application as complete as can be on Embark, on that online site that I pointed out earlier. You'll basically submit it through that site. I can grab a PDF of it once you submit it, and then I'll unsubmit it so you can keep working on your application. But that PDF is really going to help us evaluate your application on campus and to interview you the next week. So I will be sharing that with our Fulbright committee members on campus, and you'll be interviewed by 3 of them in a 20-minute interview the following week. So that's the general timeline for our internal process. And then the national deadline is October 8th. So that's how long you'll have, or at least that's my guess based on last year's deadline at this point. And so that's how long you'll have to then finalize your application and get everything completely ready to go and resubmit it up to the site. I'm happy to work with people even earlier than these deadlines. So if you know in this spring semester that you want to apply, please contact me and we can talk through drafts as early as you have them. We can talk through country selection, wherever it is in the process. I'd love to meet with you even earlier than the summer and then work really intensively with you in the summer as well. Finally, I wanted to go over some resources. So I've mentioned that you can meet with me anytime or talk with me over email. I also briefly mentioned our Fulbright committee. So we have an advisory committee that I usually find out about for the next year in the summer. And those are people who will work intensively with you starting when classes resume at the end of August. So you'll be assigned one particular kind of lead advisor who will be in charge of writing your evaluation and really working with you on drafts, but then you'll also be seeing additional advisors in your interview. And I'm one of those advisors as well, so I might be, it's possible I'm your point person, or you might see me in an interview even if I'm not. And then beginning last year, we worked with the Writing Center to hold write-ins in September. So if you're on campus, you can join us for those. Those are really informal drop-in times where you can come in and just sit and write in the company of other people applying for Fulbright, or you can get feedback from people from my office or the Writing Center who are there to help answer your Fulbright questions, to look at drafts. You can also make Writing Center appointments with the faculty writing specialists, people who are available to you to meet one-on-one and really go over your drafts in detail. So there's lots of resources. You should also be talking to the people who are going to be recommending you, getting as much feedback as possible, because you really want your essays especially to be these very polished, very compelling documents that will make you stand out and will help make the argument that you would be a really good fit for Fulbright's mission, and that you're doing work that's going to be exciting to fund. All right, that's the end of my presentation. Please feel free to email if you have any follow-up questions, and I hope to see a lot of you applying for Fulbright in the fall. All right, take care. Thank you.